All right, post-classical Asia, and look at the Tang and Song dynasties of China. So the Tang and Song dynasties come out of this great time of turmoil in China. So just like what had happened in Western Europe after the decline of the Roman Empire, China entered a long period of turmoil and unrest after the collapse of the Han dynasty in 220 AD. So the Huns had come down out of Central Asia and kind of plunged China into this disunity. So the Huns would be like the barbarians coming down into the Roman Empire, and several warring kingdoms arose. So it split up China, and what happened is science, art, and culture all declined. But in these years, Buddhism started to spread throughout most of China. And this period in China's history is known as the period of the six dynasties. And it took several hundred years before China finally reemerged and kind of unified as one of the world's leading civilizations, and that came under the Tang dynasty. So here's a map of the Tang dynasty, probably at its largest extent. So they're going to control the two main rivers, the coast, and then the Silk Road. And this is a Buddhist statue. So the Tang dynasty, during the Tang dynasty, China experienced this golden age. So early Tang rulers suppressed peasant uprisings with their army. They reunited China, and they revived the traditional feudal relationships between the emperor and the nobles and then the peasants. And they brought about peace and prosperity. They ruled over an immense empire of more than 50 million people. And China expanded into Korea, Manchuria, and parts of Central Asia. The government took careful census. So in other words, the census is when you count everybody, count the population. They went back to the Confucian examinations for you to be able to get into the government, to work in the government or to do public works. And under the early Tang, every adult received a fixed amount of land from the government, and peasants had to perform labor for the imperial government and pay taxes in the form of grain and silk. So a peasant had to work for the government, and they would pay their taxes with grain and silk. So under Empress Wu Zetian, government officials made recommendations for reform to China, and they built the magnificent capital city at Chang'an. At the time, the city was the largest city in the world, and merchants and officials from Persia, India, Arabia, Syria all came there to trade and to do business with China. And here's some pictures of the capital city at that, what it looks like today. All right, so Empress Wu Zetian, although she entered the emperor's court as a lowly consort, which is almost like a mistress, not the wife, and she entered as with the name Wu Chao, Wu Zetian arose to the highest seat of power in 690, and she actually established her own empire, so a female emperor. So Empress Wu's rise to power was achieved through cruel and calculating tactics. A popular conspiracy theory stated that she killed her own baby girl and then blamed it on the empress, so the wife of the emperor, so that the empress would be demoted and that she would become the main woman in the emperor's court. Eventually, Emperor Gaizong suffered a stroke in 655, and Wu came in, and she's the one who made all the court decisions for him. And she would be discussing affairs of the state with his counselors, who took orders from her while she sat behind a screen. So Wu's eldest son, the crown prince, began to assert his authority and to advocate policies against his mom, so against the empress. And he suddenly died in 675. So a lot of people suspect that he was poisoned by his mom. And although the next heir apparent kept a lower profile, so the next son, kind of stayed out of her business, he was accused by Wu of plotting a rebellion, and he was banished. He later obliged to commit suicide. So she kind of just got everybody out of the way that might overthrow her. So the Tang Dynasty achievements in architecture, sculpture, painting, and porcelain, They made advances in all these different areas. So, stimulated by its contact with India and the Middle East, the Tang Dynasty became one of the high points of Chinese civilization. So, they got all these ideas from other groups, especially with its accomplishments in literature and art. So, they developed a distinct style of pottery and painted glazed figures in green, yellow, and orange. Artists also excelled in metalworks and in jade. This is jade right here, and here's some metalworks. So vessels and utensils of all kinds were made by skilled craftsmen, and Tang painters depicted nature with brushworks on scrolls, and Tang poets celebrated the court life. The Chinese developed a unique form of garden where you had a stream, you had rocks, which was a rock garden, and then you'd have trees. So this is where you would go to meditate and have peaceful contemplation outside your home. They also made important innovations in map making, medicine, and printing. They developed block printing so that copies of the Confucian texts could be printed very quickly, and that way people could study them to work in the government. The Tang encouraged commerce and handicrafts, making the Silk Road even busier than before. So they encouraged all this trade. Tang China benefited from the trade with Persia, Arabia, Japan, and all the way out to the Byzantine Empire. Here's some jade works. And then the Song Dynasty. So after the fall of the Tang Dynasty in 907, China again shrank in size. And in 960, the Song Dynasty emerged in the south. Later, a rival dynasty was established in the north. So you had a north and south kind of Song Dynasty. And despite the reduction in area, the Song China continued to build upon the achievements of the Tang. The Song Dynasty was one of the most brilliant cultural eras in Chinese history. First used paper currency, so paper money, and this made it possible to pay taxes without having to use grain and silk. The government further minted strings of standardized coins, and the coins were made out of copper and iron. They eliminated forced labor for the emperor, and these factors helped bring about the large increase in farm production. So if you weren't forced to work for the emperor, you could actually work on the farms, and this led to greater wealth for China's people and for its government. So Song China was the most populous and most advanced civilization in the world at the day of its time. So their achievements for both of these groups, technology, block printing, crossbow, which was a weapon, gunpowder, and the abacus, which was used for counting. It was kind of their first calculator. They also developed the compass, and without the compass, we would not have had Columbus as soon as we did. So huge invention for seafaring people. And then in the arts, they made porcelains, which is plates and dishes and things like that. And they painted with black ink and on silk paper. And Chinese poets and historians wrote important works. So under the Song Dynasty, you also had the Grand Canal, which connected the two main rivers, or two larger rivers in China. And it was also used to ship grain north and south in China, because you can only travel really east and west in China on those two main rivers. Caravans carried the silks over the Silk Road, and large ships brought goods to Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, India, and Africa. Science and technology also made advances. Song astronomers developed new instruments, doctors studied acupuncture, and mathematicians solved advanced equations. They also had gunpowder for the use of war, the compass for navigation, and they invented the movable printing. So here, this is like block printing, but you could change out the words to make sentences that you needed to. All right, and of course the fall of the Song is going to be the Mongols. So the greatest threat to the Song faced consistently were these tribes north of China, and in order to secure their borders, the Song allied themselves with a new group of people in the north, which were the Mongols. So the alliances proved to be a mistake, as the Mongols soon overran the empire and established a foreign dynasty to rule over China, which was the Yan dynasty. So the Mongols are going to take over the Chinese dynasty. And there's some different pictures of some of the things they invented: block printing, paper money, gunpowder. This was used for the gunpowder, the compass, and then there's paper money again. So women in China, Tang in the song followed the traditional beliefs of Confucianism, which said a woman must obey her father, then obey her husband, and obey her son when she gets to older age. So girls left their families when they were married. So long as they gave birth to as many sons as possible, they were actually treated with more respect by the family that they went to. So if a woman's husband died, she could share in receiving a portion of the husband's land. Divorce was allowed if accepted by both the husband and the wife. And the practice of female foot binding began under the Song Dynasty, which illustrated the desire to limit female mobility so they couldn't move as quick as they did in the past. So what they did is they would bind girls' feet up when they were very young into tight bandages, and this gave wealthy women very, very small feet, which was considered attractive. But of course, it made it very difficult to walk. So this is what you ended up with. I think the size 3 shoe is what they were looking for. And here's some pictures of foot binding. All right, so China's influence on Japan. Chinese influence on Japan. Confucian instilled loyalty to family and ruler, so that would move from China into Japan. Buddhism taught the Japanese to renounce selfish desires. Taoism encouraged a love of nature. The Chinese method of writing characters was also adapted by Japan. And Chinese music, art, and dance, and even cooking influenced Japanese styles and tastes. They also got silks and pottery from China. And the ruler of Japan set up his imperial court just like they did in China and declared himself emperor. So those were the things that were all the same. So things that were not the same is, as time passed, the Japanese emperors freed some of their nobles from their tax burdens. Many noble landowners began to raise their own private armies of warriors, and the imperial government collected less and less taxes, grew weaker. And then eventually you're going to end up with open warfare. Breaks out between these noble families to take control. And in 1192, one of the nobles emerged as the most powerful. And instead of overthrowing the emperor, what this powerful noble did was he kept the emperor in place, but he became the supreme military governor, known as the shogun, and he had all the power in Japan. So China and Korea influenced Japan. The most influential was the incorporation of the Chinese religion, Buddhism, and the Chinese writing system. And the Japanese also learned how to make porcelain and paper from the Chinese. They learned about government, architecture, and they learned how to lay out cities the way China had done. And China's influence over Japan revolutionized China's influence over Japan revolutionized Japan culture. So the Japanese feudalism. So for the next 600 years, the shoguns were the real rulers of Japan, with the emperors merely acting as figureheads. The shogun stood at the top of the Japanese feudal system. So to provide military protection for their lands, noble landowners recruited samurai warrior knights on horseback with armor of leather and iron and swords. Each samurai swore an oath of loyalty to the emperor and his local daimyo, which is the local noble. So a samurai promised to follow a strict code of bushido. It's an honor code that emphasized loyalty of the samurai to the daimyo. In return for this loyalty, the daimyo provided the samurai with social status and economic support. So he took care of the samurai. So just like the feudalism we saw in the Middle Ages, you have the emperor at the top who really doesn't have power. This is all the power right here. You have the shogun, then you have the nobles, which is the daimyos, then you have the knights, which is the samurais, and then you have the peasants. And what makes them different is at the bottom, below peasants, is your artisans, people who made different crafts and things like that, and then your merchants, people who sold things. And then here's some of the similarities between the knights and the samurai. Here's some samurai, some pictures.